An investigative reporter at MSN wrote this headline today. Maybe it's finally time to read those Ron Paul newsletters. The journalist saying apparently enough people haven't heard about these newsletters for Congressman Paul to finish a strong third in Iowa. We are way ahead of that reporter. Tonight, a look at what these newsletters are about, who really wrote them, and what they say. After a 3-week investigation, Ben explains in tonight's Reality Check.
The talk of Ron Paul's racist newsletters has been all over the news for the past few weeks and seemed to dominate all of the congressman's interviews.
They were called the Ron Paul Report. And did you read them at all when they were published during those years? Did you ever sort of take a look at it and say, you know what, this isn't what I stand for?
Not all the time.
But you did read them.
Not all the time.
So what about these newsletters is true? And what is the rest of the media not telling you? Maybe because they haven't bothered to look. Starting as far back as 1976, Congressman Paul published a newsletter. It had gone by several names: the Ron Paul Political Report, the Ron Paul Freedom Report, the Ron Paul Investment Letter, among others. So what does Congressman Paul say back in 1995 about the newsletter?
Along with that, I also put out a political type of business investment newsletter that sort of covered all these areas. And it covered a lot about what was going on in Washington and financial events, and especially some of the monetary events.
So it was largely an investment newsletter dealing with currency, gold, and investments. That was the case anyways from 1976 to 1988. Over the course of those 144 editions, no racist content. Now, to understand this story, you have to look at the timeline. In 1984, Paul lost his seat in Congress when he made an unsuccessful run for the Senate. In 1985, he went back to Texas to continue to practice medicine full-time as an OBGYN. His return to politics as congressman was in 1996. In 2007, when Congressman Paul was last running for president, a newspaper called The New Republic found hard copies of the newsletters. And these, they reported, were filled with racist, anti-homosexual, and conspiracy-oriented content. So let's talk content. In all, the Ron Paul newsletters were released on a monthly basis for 20 years. That means there were no fewer than 240 editions published. There are a total of 20 editions of the Ron Paul newsletters, which have passages or sections of racist, bigoted, or anti-homosexual language, as well as conspiracy theories. And since the conspiracy theories aren't really the issue here, let's stay on focus and talk about the racist passages. The way the New Republic newspaper stacks it, the total number of newsletter editions with racist passages is not 20, but actually 9 newsletters. So let's take a look at those 9. I told you that Congressman Paul first left Congress at the beginning of 1985. The first racist passage shows up in October of 1990. The next month, in November of 1990, a reference to David Duke, even though the content of that newsletter was not necessarily racist. The following month, in December of 1990, the author attacks Martin Luther King Jr. And then in February of 1991, another newsletter has passages trashing Dr. King's legacy. So what we have here, racist passages show up from October of 1990 to February of 1991, 4 out of 5 consecutive months. But those aren't all of the racist passages. A lapse goes by of about 15 months. In June of 1992, in a special edition, it focuses on race riots in Los Angeles, there is a lot of racist content. 1 month later, in the very next edition, there's writing about black rage. And the final report where we see racist tones is 6 months later in a passage about the disappearing white majority. So did Ron Paul write these newsletters? He says he didn't. In 2007, the libertarian magazine Reason cited an anonymous source close to the 2008 Paul campaign. That source attributes much of the content from these newsletters to Lew Rockwell. Rockwell, whose name appears on the newsletters under the title of contributing editor, told the New Republic that he did not write the controversial articles. He said there were, though, 7 or 8 freelancers involved at various stages during his tenure. So here's what you need to know. Dr. Paul has said that he did not write the newsletters. He has disavowed them, but he also has said that he takes responsibility for the content because it was published under his name. And he should take that responsibility. But the more you look at these newsletters, the more questions come up. And as a journalist, one of my biggest questions is for the reporter who first broke the story in 1997. The most racist newsletter supposedly written by Dr. Paul is that 1992 special report. One blog attempted to prove that this newsletter was more than just passages, put PDF copies online of the entire 8-page newsletter to prove the full content of Ron Paul's newsletter was racist. They put up full copies of all pages, except for page 8, the very last one. That page is cut off halfway through. Now, I found when researching the story that back in 1997, the original author of the New Republic article, James Kirchick, explained that most of the letters had no byline. Specifically, that none of the racist newsletters had a byline, except for one. one newsletter that contained the byline of someone else, not Congressman Paul. But Kurczyk fails to disclose two very important things. Number one, whose name was in that byline, and number two, which article they wrote, only saying that the mystery writer wrote, quote, one special edition of the Ron Paul report. The only special edition I can find is the 1992 article. So does that mean the most racist evidence in these newsletters actually has someone else's name on it? I don't know, but I'd like to know one way or the other. Now, I have repeatedly tried to contact for 2 weeks the New Republic and James Kurczyk to get an answer as to which special report had another author's byline. But I'm still waiting to hear back. And that is Reality Check.
An enormous response to last night's Reality Check of the Ron Paul newsletters. Today, the writer who first released copies of the newsletters contacted Ben to set the record straight on who else was writing some of those newsletters. Ben has the information that isn't being reported anywhere else, and he's sharing it in a Reality Check reply all.
First of all, let me thank the writer James Kurczyk for getting back with me today. I told you last night that in 2007, the New Republic magazine published copies of the Ron Paul report, the Ron Paul strategy guide, etc. In those newsletters, there were some passages that could be deemed racist and certainly inappropriate. One caveat, though, I also pointed out that the author of those articles, James Kurczyk, mentions that none of the racist newsletters have a byline, except for one. The only problem, back in 2007, he did not disclose the name of that writer or which edition he or she wrote, until today. For the first time, I'm going to share with you the name of that writer. Take a look. It is a 1993 edition of the Ron Paul Strategy Guide. The article, How to Protect Against Urban Violence, and the author, one James B. Powell. After 4 years of reports on these newsletters from all kinds of media outlets, I have not seen this guy's name anywhere. And the full 8 pages, well, they match so closely to some of the other so-called racist newsletters, it is stunning. Powell writes about the 1992 riots in Los Angeles, as well as what he calls the Holocaust coming to America's urban areas. He calls California Congresswoman Maxine Waters a militant leader. And the article goes on to talk about how to be self-reliant when well-armed gangs move in to threaten your home. Like the other newsletters, it's not racist per se, but certainly could be deemed questionable or insensitive. And certainly the content of that newsletter very similar in style to the other so-called racist newsletters. But there is a bigger issue than just Ron Paul here. What you may not know is that in this presidential election cycle, every single candidate for president, including President Obama himself, has been called a racist. Herman Cain was called a racist because he said that blacks have been brainwashed into voting for the Democratic Party. Mitt Romney called a racist by Bill Maher because he's a Mormon, and called a racist by MSNBC for continually calling the president by his first and last names instead of saying President Obama. Newt Gingrich was called a racist a few months ago for calling Palestinians an invented people. Michelle Bachmann called a racist a few months ago after saying African-American children and black families were better off during slavery, presumably because they had both parents living with them. She says she was taken out of context. Rick Perry, he was called a racist for a name spray-painted on a rock at a hunting camp rented by his family. Also saying he was taken out of context, by the way, one of the latest claims against Rick Santorum, he's being called a racist for a supposed statement that he made that blacks shouldn't receive welfare. He says he didn't say that. And of course, President Obama himself has been called a racist by many people, including Glenn Beck, who triggered a firestorm after saying that he believes President Obama doesn't like white people. President Obama also called a racist for attending the Reverend Wright's church for 20 years. So here's what you need to know. The talk of racism has become the lowest form of political discourse. But even as I just went down that list of candidates, some of you at home thought to yourselves how the candidates you don't like, well, they probably are racist. And when you heard the name of a candidate you support, you thought, no, that's ridiculous. See how it works? Anything that can be deemed insensitive these days is called racist. Anyone who stands too close to those who say those things, a racist. Under the examples I just gave you, are they all racist? Maybe none of them are. How about this year? We try to have an election based on substance and on ideas and on political record rather than on name calling. And that is Reality Check. One thing I want to make clear, this report was posted by the New Republic with the byline of James B. Powell in 2008, but the link to the newsletter was separate from the other articles that were linked by TNR that were suspected of being written by Dr. Paul. And even though the story was posted in the original article, Powell's name was never used. For the past 4 years, we have searched for and looked for any reports about this story and not found a single one about Powell and the Ron Paul newsletters, even from the New Republic. I'm going to post the entire 8 pages of his newsletter at the end of this story on our website. You can read it for yourself. Along with that, you can read excerpts from the Ron Paul Strategy Guide. You can compare them for yourself. As I mentioned, the writing strikingly similar. If you'd like to make your voice heard on this story, you can comment on my Facebook page. Just search facebook.com/Ben Swann Reality Check.
This has been addressed for 20 years, and nobody accuses me of that type of beliefs or language. I'm a true civil libertarian, and I think people dig these up when people think that, oh, his economic policies are winning, his foreign policies are winning, his monetary policies are winning. So they have to dig these things up, which they really can't pin on me because they've been disavowed and they are old, they've been rehashed. Just go back and read all the articles and there's all the explanations. So yes, it wasn't good, and but I didn't write them and those aren't my beliefs, so I sleep well.
Are you comfortable in telling us who did write them? You haven't been able to sort of tell us specifically who wrote them.
I really don't know. 20 years ago, I had 6 or 8 people helping me with the letter, and I was practicing medicine, to tell you the truth. Right. And so I do not know.
But we could find out because you had 6 or 8 people. Like it's one of those 6 or 8 people.
Well, possibly I could, but
I guess as you get closer to being president of the United States, folks will want to know that you don't really dislike black people and people with AIDS and things like that. And I get what you're saying, that you're going up in the polls and people are
excuse me, why don't they concentrate on every word I've ever said, every speech I've ever given, every conference I've ever gone to, right. And maybe that's where, maybe my beliefs are more important than, you know, stirring this up. So my beliefs, actually, a true civil libertarian is a strong defense of individual liberties, and nobody's accused me of lacking a libertarian spirit of defending individuals. So these charges are a total contradiction to everything I've said and everything I believe.
Do you think the media establishment's been fair to you or unfair?
Oh, you mean, well, they're so biased. I don't know whether you use fair or unfair.
Okay, you think they're biased against you?
Well, I mean, why don't you go look at Jon Stewart's reports when he defends me on the biasness of the media. I mean, he mocked the media for the way they've treated me during the campaign and reporting. But I don't get upset about that, and that's just the way you guys work, so it's no big deal to me. That's just the way. And the more progress I make in challenging the status quo, challenge the bankers and challenging the bank bailout, challenging this wicked foreign policy of war forever in the military-industrial complex, the stronger they will emphasize picking this and ignoring the important issues of what freedom is all about and what civil liberty is all about. And why don't you go look at why I make a lot of comments about the war on drugs and how racist the enforcement of drug laws are. I mean, who else defends
I know you do.
the racism in drug laws? Yeah, you don't. You're concentrating on something else. So somebody someday ought to look at the whole picture rather than picking out something I didn't write and I have disavowed. Yeah. So and that's been done many times. So go back and read the record.
It's the cost of surging in the polls.
Ron Paul, damn it! Don't ask me about my racist letters. Folks, I saw this interview on CNN. I'm talking about blatant, outrageous misdirection. I mean, they are running scared. So now what? Now we got to focus on the negative. We got to make folk run from Ron Paul. Front runner, indeed. We're going to fix that. Prior to this, they have been largely ignoring Ron Paul. Ron Paul, keep on doing you, man. When they start coming with that nonsense, answer the question like you did, and then take the damn mic off and walk on out the door. We understand, we get it, and those of us that are out here, boots on the ground, we are going to keep pushing. And folks, don't ask me no more about why don't I post my video here and there. Hell, either make videos yourself and put them out there or repost this one. Get the word out. Put the boots on the ground. And you know what? Somebody asked me, well, you ought to be, and I don't believe they were really a Ron Paul supporter. If your state is not an open primary state, do I look like a damn idiot? I know that. I told you, I don't hold to any party anymore, Democrat or Republican. They are both screwing us. And I understand that Ron Paul is running under the Republican Party because the two-party system has us locked down to where virtually a third party has absolutely no chance. The only thing they end up doing is splitting the vote and letting the lesser of two evils, which I will never ever do again, vote for the lesser of two evils. Been down that road, ain't going down that road again. I didn't mean to go this long. And yes, I'm not driving. This is 3D green screen interactive technology. So don't ask. T-Mite out till next time.